Before we start today, this episode contains an honest conversation about infertility and pregnancy loss. If that's something you're navigating right now, please take care of yourself as you listen. Lucy had done 5 rounds of IVF on her own, 3 miscarriages and 2 rounds that didn't work. And eventually she made a decision. Stop IVF and focus on finding someone instead. When she met him online, his kids were in every photo. Lucy wasn't put off. She thought, ready-made family, more love, not less, and why would anyone push that away? What she didn't know was how much the years of hoping for a family of her own had shaped the picture in her head, and how hard it would hit when reality looked nothing like it. I'm Katie South, stepfamily specialist and coach, and this is Stepmum Space, the judgment-free zone where we talk candidly about the fairy tales and scary tales of stepmom life. So whether you've been a stepmom for years, you're just starting out, or you want to understand the stepmom in your life a bit better, this is the place for you. My guest today, Lucy, talks candidly about what she was really walking into and what it took to find her place in it. Lucy is also one of my clients, and I've had the privilege of working with her for a little while now. And I know that you are going to love this chat. She's got so much insight to share. I'm really happy today to be joined by Lucy, who I've gotten to know quite well. So welcome, Lucy. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Katie, for having me. It's great to be on here.
And as always, I'd love it if you could start by just sharing a little bit about how you first became a stepmom.
So I've been single for many, many years, bad dating in London and all sorts. And then COVID, I moved outside of London and started Tinder and met my now husband on Tinder 5 years ago. He had 2 kids already, a girl, 16 now, 14 boy. And we met and hit it off, dating during COVID to start with, social distancing and all that. And there we got married about 18 months ago.
Oh, lovely. It's funny how COVID just sort of amplified this dating thing for people, which is really ironic because the whole thing was about not being connected. But then for
exactly.
it was definitely a really interesting time. And how did you feel about the fact that he had kids when you first met?
I was quite excited by that prospect because I wasn't able to have kids of my own. So it was like, cool, well, if I meet someone with kids, then it's a ready-made family. I can go in, I can do my thing. I don't need to go down the path of I might not be able to have kids and disappoint someone if they wanted them and blah, blah, blah. In that sense, it wasn't a daunting concept. I didn't have any stepmom friends to hear any horror stories. So in my mind, it was cool, I'm getting another family. This is my chance to be a sort of a motherly figure, if you like.
Yeah, it's almost that like hope and naivety all meshed as one, isn't it?
Yeah.
So after you met in lockdown, became serious with your now husband, how was the first meeting with the kids?
I mean, I was the most nervous I've probably been in my life because we met after about 6 months. So we were partly because of COVID, but also because we just didn't want to rush it. Like I had no interest in meeting kids and, in my view, forming attachments to kids that may not then stay in my life. And my husband also then didn't want to introduce anyone else into their life that wasn't, serious. So it was about 6 months and we met at a coffee shop and, it was nice. They're quieter kids and I think they would have been quieter anyway, meeting someone they don't know. But I was introduced as a friend, although the eldest, who would have been, I don't know, about 11-ish, 12-ish at that point, she said she knew it was more because we'd shared a brownie. So she'd figured that out, which she then told us later. But so yeah, we had like an hour's meeting and that was that.
Of the way that's like the framework for other.
I know. Yeah, we shared a brownie. The boy was 8-ish at that point. I can't even remember now, but less awareness. But it was fine. It wasn't too high pressured. It was probably half an hour to an hour or something. And but yeah, I was scared, very scared, more scared than excited.
I think you were scared of.
I knew I really liked this guy I'd waited my whole life to meet someone that really was like the one. And I knew I was going to hopefully marry this guy. And, I really wanted all of that. And I didn't want I didn't want to be a negative person. I didn't want the kids not to like me. And so I think, I can't remember if I tried too hard or not, to be honest. I think it went fine, so maybe not. And in half an hour, there's only so much trying too hard you can do. But yeah, I think that's why I was just so nervous and scared that I was going to mess it up.
Obviously, we've had conversations before this recording today, and you've talked a bit about how you've got a lot of friends with kids and a lot of godchildren. So you're someone who naturally kids gravitate to, you get on well with them. How was the first meeting with his children compared to other children that you've met?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I think because the pressure was on, there was more, because I wanted it to work so badly. And I guess I had this vision that, we'd become some kind of family and we'd spend more time together. And I knew he only had them once in the week and then at the week, every other weekend. So I knew it wasn't like a full-time role, if you like. But I think it was the pressure of that made it different to meeting my friends' kids and being involved in their lives. And I think, to be honest with you, meeting like friends' kids, most of them I met when they were babies. And they'd grown up with me, I'd grown up with them. And I guess I didn't connect it. I was just so worried that I wanted it to work, that I didn't think my neighbours who have teenagers that I get on really well with, now I met them as teenagers and that relationship was fine. So I didn't overthink it back then, other than I just want it to work, I think.
And I guess you don't think, oh, my best friend might ditch me if her kids don't like me.
Yeah, this is very true.
It's a totally different
very true. Yeah, exactly.
So where did it go from there?
So we went slowly. I have a dog. And that was quite I don't know how to describe it, but it was quite a good way to bond with them in some ways. And, we did dog walks. And so there was never any high pressured meeting. And then there was a family member death in their family. And so I was around a lot more. So it kind of, then it was, Lucy's going to stay over now. And so it kind of built up, but it felt slow enough. It was probably over the period from after meeting them at 6 months, it was probably 2 to 3 months that then I was very much Dad's girlfriend, and they knew that I might be around, and that was how it worked, really.
And how did they take to you being around more?
Do you know, it's quite hard to remember the early days, like the really early days, because it's easier to remember when we all started living together in those times because they were around more. I felt I was Dad's friend. There wasn't opportunity or need from me to get involved with the more parenting things because we were meeting to go for walks. We were maybe having brunch together, or, we were doing little activities in bite size. It wasn't until they started to, which was about 18 months, that they started to come and stay for a weekend at my house, because my husband moved into my home, which we now share. And so that was when I say it started to go differently, but it certainly started to feel different because it was less about dating each other, the getting to know each other part. It was more, this is real life, or I don't know, the dynamics of day to day, that sort of thing.
And when you moved in together, obviously big shift for you. You said you'd lived on your own, you'd been single you'd got the man of your dreams living with you, which in some ways must have been wonderful. How is it suddenly having 2 kids there every other weekend?
So again, I think I went into it thinking, okay, this is quite cool. I get him to myself for a weekend, and in the week we can do whatever we want to do. And then every other weekend they're around and we get to with this family thing and we can do more cool stuff, but like family and kids stuff. So again, I think I was definitely like optimistic going in and hadn't really thought about it. And then I didn't really realize, what happens when the kids don't want to do anything for a weekend. And they've got older into much more the teenage years. They barely want to leave their room all weekend, let alone even come for a day trip somewhere or do something. And so I guess there was a bit of shift in terms of maybe they were letting themselves be normal with me once they moved in. They weren't playing a role. And I then saw this is the day-to-day of a tween or a teenager or whatever phase it was over the last 5 years. And so that became more visible. It almost, not that it got boring, but it was that mundane part, the getting to know you bit, the honeymoon period where didn't overthink things, didn't do it. And then you get into that, what's the day to day and how does it all work? And I guess then that's when challenges started to come up. And I certainly started to overthink a lot more, and topics like roles and where can I play and where can I not play, that certainly became a much bigger filler in my head, if you like. So once my husband had moved in and we were then we were engaged and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that was the shift and the difference. I think it was that I'm like, I like process, and I like to know my role, and I like to know what I'm accountable for and all this sort of stuff. And one of the things I've definitely learned about step parenting is that it's a lot of grey. It's a lot of murky. One week it's one thing, the next week it's another thing. And it's also what could be right one week isn't necessarily right the next week. And I think I was looking for much clearer definition than what my husband, my stepkids, everyone involved, if you will, was able to give me. No one was able to say, these are your role and responsibilities. This is what you're applying for. And this is what it will be. Because I was like, is it my decision? Is it their decision? Who gets to choose? And I wasn't able just to let things be and evolve. Lots of people have said it could take 7 years, this 7-year thing of being a proper blended family or whatever the word is. And I was like, God, that's a long time. I was like, how am I not going to understand boundaries and rules and how things work?
I really hate that, because it makes it sound like everything's going to be fine in 7 years. Just
7 years. Exactly. And I think, and it's only recently that I've let go of this 7 years thing. And it's just been like, do you know what? It will be what it will be when it will be it, and however it comes and goes. And it might get 2 steps forward, 10 steps back, 20 steps forward, 2 steps back. And I think being comfortable with being uncomfortable was the biggest learning thing that I've had to learn. And I definitely haven't nailed it by any means. But that's the biggest thing for sure. Yeah. Being uncomfortable with the not knowing or the changing minds or any part of the dynamic. That's the bit that I've had to adjust to for my personality style.
Yeah, because like you say, if you're someone who you want clarity, you want to know what you're accountable for, what you're not accountable for, and then suddenly you end up in this role that really has no definition. Some things people think you should do, some people think you don't. And it can be so confusing for people. And I think when you talked earlier about how you had wanted to have your own children, so you probably go in with even clearer idea of, this is what I want our family to be like.
And I think that's spot on. And I think that one, again, that's my other, I didn't think I was bringing much luggage to the relationship because I've been single for so long, and I was probably, but I don't think I really anticipated how much dealing with infertility, dealing with miscarriage, dealing with not having my own family would play in how my high expectations of what I wanted this family to look like, the way I expected the kids to just respond to me, the way I hoped we'd be playing board games every Friday night. That I just didn't appreciate how much that had shaped that picture. It wasn't just when we're little girls and we're all playing, being married and having kids when we're 5 to 10 and all this sort of thing. And whilst that may have been there from the stereotypes, it was much more around the 5 to 10 years before I met my husband that had shaped my high expectations of what I wanted this to be. And therefore the big sense of disappointment that it didn't reach those expectations, hopes, dreams of what I wanted it to be. Now I know maybe quite unrealistic, or maybe not, and maybe that's just fine. And I tried to find the right partner for a long time and I couldn't, so I decided to do it on my own and find a sperm donor and go it all through. And I did about 5 rounds of IVF over about 3-4 years, last one finishing the year before I met my husband. And 3 of those ended in miscarriages. 2 of them didn't work. All early miscarriages. But
I'm so sorry you went through that.
That's okay. It is. And doing it on my own was I was used to doing stuff on my own. So I guess I didn't know. I had some very supportive family and friends and stuff, but it's not quite the same as having a partner to try and start a family with. So I didn't know any different. I didn't know what it would be like to have someone support you when you're going through miscarriages and hospital visits and stuff. But it didn't kill all my hope. And so obviously it didn't work. And I came to the conclusion that I couldn't try again. I didn't have it in me, and I needed to instead focus on meeting someone. I had the two dreams: meet someone, have kids. And while I was doing the IVF, I'd had a few dates, but it's a bit weird to say you're doing this and then you're trying to meet somebody. So I said, stop any dating activity. And I made the decision to stop the IVF and find someone. And if they happen to want kids, we try it. I was open, but I was really prepared to speak to people that didn't want kids or had them already and didn't want any more, because I wasn't resting it all on, I need to find someone in my 40s that still wants kids. And because it's slim pickings by that point. So yeah, so that was the sort of lead up to it.
You talked a bit about how that experience of wanting to have children had shaped your ideas of what it would be like coming into a family, and you talked about having a ready-made family and then you becoming part of that family. What were you hoping it would be like?
Honestly, I watched so many rom-coms and so much American family TV shows where step parents, if they're even in it, everyone gets on with everyone. Everyone's popping into each other's garden saying hi and all this. And I think I just thought it would just work. I think I just thought there wouldn't be difficult issues with an ex. There wouldn't, because I think I just didn't think. For someone who is an overthinker, because it's what you don't know. Do you know what I mean? And I hadn't had any friends with difficult step family relationships. I had none. And this day I still don't have many. So I didn't have any reason to think it wouldn't be anything like one of the nice TV shows or American shows where families they just work. And the more love, the better. And if you've got someone that's willing to help out and do things, why wouldn't you want to take it? I never thought that help wouldn't be welcomed, or, if there's stuff to give, there's love to give, and there's a willing person to be involved, why would that be a bad thing? And I guess it didn't go any further than that, really.
Yeah, which is completely understandable, because in every other walk of life, like they say, it takes a village. And then suddenly if a village includes a stepmom, maybe not apart from you.
Yeah. And I think I played a role with neighbours' kids during COVID. I was bubbled up with another family, and I went round and we did tie-dyeing and we did activities, and and the parents like, oh, cool idea, let's do it. And I guess I've just been maybe I've been lucky. I've just been very welcomed into supporting friends with their kids, whether it's off their hands for an afternoon, taking them on holiday, or just coming and having a cup of tea. I've never had any pushback on that. I've never had you're overstepping the mark or you're not there. So I guess I didn't even think I needed to do anything different. I thought that just showing up and offering and being there would be normal.
And where did the pushback come from?
If I'm honest now, I think there was internal pushback for me, because I don't think I offered as much. I didn't actually treat it in the way, because I was so scared of it going wrong. So I wasn't probably my natural self. So I probably didn't push and offer as much as I would have done to my friends' kids and godkids and stuff. And then I guess the biggest barrier is that the kids are very different to me in terms of personality and hobbies and what they like to do. So before, my ideas would be welcomed with, hey, yeah, cool, fine, let's do it. That's great, blah, blah, blah. And they fell flat. And there wasn't much, they want to do that, or clearly they didn't enjoy it. And so I suddenly was like, oh, this isn't working. This isn't quite going as I planned, hoped, whatever. And then I was like, and that is really when I guess I started to see a lot more in terms of, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm in a job where I've earned my stars. I've worked my way up. I'm like, okay, in my mind, I've failed here. Me being me isn't enough in this scenario. What the hell do I do? And I was quite lost in that, which is, to be fair, was around that I found your podcast and I took back off to some therapy and this sort of thing. But just that slight feeling of loss, because I do what I know has worked before. If something's worked before, let's reuse it and stuff. And then I was like, okay, I need to bond in a different way. And I now need to figure out that is. And whilst that sounds very organized thinking in how I'm saying with it, that's not how I was having the conversation in my head at the time. What were the conversations in your head? Oh, I think it was, I failed here. They don't get me. I don't get them. We're not a family if this isn't working. All sorts of monologue in my brain around what can I do differently? Why don't they like me? What's wrong with them? Why can't my husband help out more? Even though to be fair, he was doing a great job. But I think it was just a mess of this hadn't gone as I expected. My expectations hadn't been reached. And I was a bit of a lost soul in amongst it all, to be honest.
And it doesn't make it any easier, but it's something that's so common with women who are independent, successful, have managed their own problems, have learned throughout their lives. If I work really hard at something, I can get the result I want. If the first thing I try doesn't work, I'll try another strategy and I'll get there. And then suddenly you're in the situation and you've tried everything and it's not working. You're not getting what you want. And what I noticed when you were talking, and again, it's something that's so common, is you turn it back on yourself. Why don't they like me? What am I doing wrong? Why am I failing at this? What isn't working? When more often it's that this system of a step family is so complicated and nobody teaches us how to navigate it. So it doesn't surprise me that you ended up in that situation of thinking, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah, it's just, and that there isn't, because even if you meet another step parent, their dynamic's different. It's not like the job description. With your job, you go and meet a community of people that do the same job and you can all discuss how, and there's a lot more similarities. It's not like that. So you're, even with listening to the podcast, okay, that's cool, but actually this bit's different. So I don't know if that would work. You have to really and I think it's a real dangerous overthinking area. And that's really damaging for mental health. And women, we often overthink things anyway. I think a lot of women do. But the problem with that is that then I found you get into a funk and it takes longer to get out of it. So things like when the kids left on a Sunday evening, if it's not been a great weekend, rather than being like, cool, now I've got my time back, you're in this funk because you've overthought everything the weekend, like where it went wrong, and you start picking at things, and it's harder to see the good stuff because you're so busy lamenting the bad stuff that it's harder to get yourself out of that funk on a Sunday night or weekday night, whenever it is. And so, yeah, the spiraling thing is just, it's certainly not a happy place to be. And it's not a healthy or these days not to be. You can't make good decisions and you can't tell yourself that you're not to blame and it's not your fault when you're feeling crappy. But easier said than done to get into a better headspace.
It is about practice, about recognizing those signals and recognizing signs. And a lot of the work I do on the Back in Control program, we do 1 week specifically on stopping that spiral and noticing it, and the techniques that you actually need to be able to stop it in yourself. Because as you say, once you're in that bad place, you find that your time is not only dominated by the negativity and the low mood when the kids are there, but it carries on when they're not there because you can carry it into the week.
Yeah. And some of the help, and this was where I think working with you has been helpful, because some of the stuff out there so I think I tried things like, well, they're not my kids, so why am I worrying so much? Like, why? That's not my responsibility. That's not that. And do you know what? That wasn't me. I can't not be involved to some degree. And that didn't help me. That didn't make me feel like, because that was just shifting it. It didn't help me deal with it. Whereas mantras and things like, we're all different and that's okay, felt much more like I've seen it, I've accepted it, I've processed it quite quickly and slightly let it go rather than just pushing it. And there was quite a shift. And I noticed that's when some of those techniques were much better for me. So there's no point ignoring it, but I also didn't need to carry it all. Like you said, what's yours to carry, what's not yours to carry. I don't have to carry it all, but for me, it's important I acknowledge it. And because if I don't, and I ignore it and I choose not to be involved and I choose this, that's really far away from me, my values, what I want in a family and stuff. So I think it's finding that middle finding that place which is still you and that you don't lose you, and the acceptance, like an acceptance of like, we're all different and that's okay. It's such a calmer for me. It's a few words and I can't tell you how much it calms me. Like when things aren't quite, when I disagree with whether it's my husband. To be fair, even in the work environment, it's sometimes like it's applied everywhere. It just calms it.
Yeah, and I think that for people listening, that's something that we had worked on, because when we started our work together, one of the things that you were finding so hard was that these kids weren't responding to some of the things that you wanted to do or that you were suggesting, or some of the values that you had around new experiences were so alien to them. And that was bringing down some of your experiences. So actually, instead of dancing around it, or find it hard when there's a lot of people who say, oh, you've just got to reframe your mind, because it almost teaches you then not to acknowledge your own feelings. And actually, it's okay for you to find that really difficult, that they want to go on holiday and eat cheeseburgers for a week or whatever it might be. So acknowledging the real feeling you have about it is so important. And I was working with a woman earlier in the week who was talking about some of the things that she's had to give up to become a step parent. And she said, I've never really talked about it before because I chose this life with him. So it doesn't feel right that I complain that I had to give up all these various things. Actually, that's really important that you should talk about that. And like, both things can be true. You can have chosen the man, but still feel really sad that you've had to give up parts of your life to be in this family. And so I don't like the sort of toxic positivity of just reframe everything, because it doesn't work.
No. And I think this is where, if you've got sadness from previous things, whether it's grief, whether it's like giving up things, there's that such a risk of resentment. And I think I had that near at the beginning, like resentment that these kids, which are nice enough kids, just very different to me. And it was quite, they're in my space, but where's the common ground and anything? And there's a resentment of, so you brought them into my life. And that's not healthy either. That was not a thing. But equally, we had those conversations, because if we hadn't, in fact, we had loads of those sort of conversations for many. We still have those conversations, but that all has to be shared and dealt with. It can't be ignored.
I'm really pleased you brought up resentment, because it's one of the things that I get asked about a lot, because it's classed as like a negative, selfish, even stepmother emotion. I've never met a stepmom who hasn't felt it in one way or another. But it sounds like you were talking about it as some resentment towards your husband as well.
Yeah, because I think I probably had more resentment towards him than I did towards the kids, because in my head I was like, you can't blame kids for that. I can't blame kids for not being who I wanted them to be. I can't blame the kids for not behaving in what I think is a normal kid way or anything like that. But I can blame the parent. That was that was where my brain went. And that ended up in me being on the outside. It was the three of them and me, because that was like I'm pushing. Whilst you don't use the word resentment necessarily in the conversation with your partner, that's essentially what it is. It's like, why aren't you doing anything to help this? Why have you let them become like this? Why don't they want new experiences? Why are they blah, blah, blah? What did you not do as a parent to make them better? And blah, And actually it ended up, I was critiquing his parenting. That's how it felt to him. And then everything, he was looking out for everything. And I felt that he told me he was stepping on eggshells, because he felt that I was judging every move he made in how he parented his kids. And I heard that back, and I was like, I don't want that. That's not how I meant it to be, but I can totally understand why you've come out with that. And so we had to shift a lot. And again, it ebbs and flows. I think there's always a case where, for the biological parent, I'm like, you could have done that differently, but it just doesn't, it's not such a big part of conversations anymore. And I definitely don't hold any resentment, because I can see how hard it is to parent kids. A lot of my friends are now parenting teenagers, and I'm seeing a lot of similar issues. So I was just a bit there before them. So I didn't have any, like, the general parenting learning, and I can see how hard it is. So now I have a lot more compassion, and I don't hold resentment in the same way I did. I can't promise that it doesn't pop up every now and again, but it's definitely not as big as it was in those early few years.
There'll be people listening who will be thinking, I would love to have that conversation with my husband or my partner, but how on earth would I get started without them going into full-on defensive mode? Have you got any tips?
My biggest tip is to be as emotive with it as possible and talk about the feelings and stuff rather than the actions. So it's more around, or at least make sure you say both. Why didn't you tell them to do that? Why didn't you do this? It's very accusational rather than saying, you could say, why didn't you do that? It made me feel like I was whatever. I think adding emotions, for a start, it softens a conversation so it doesn't sound so accusational. And that's the crux of it. It's about how it makes you feel, not what because actually the action sometimes sometimes you'll be annoyed by sometimes something, sometimes you won't.
Yeah.
And I think talking about the emotion and timings of things I think the biggest aid to having those conversations.
Yeah. I think something I always teach and try and use in my own life, I call it fact, feeling, need. So you lead with the facts. Yesterday after dinner, the kids just walked off and left their plates on the table. Then you go with the feeling. That made me feel disrespected and like I'm supposed to pick up everyone else. And then the need, which would be, can we make sure that we all clear the table together after a meal? And as you say, it just takes out that accusatory, you didn't teach your kids how to pick up after themselves, or your kids are so lazy, or your kids treat the place like a hotel. And it's a much easier way of doing it. So fact, feeling, need, if anyone needs something in their back pocket, that is quite helpful. And like you say, the emotion softens things because you're saying, I feel like no one respects me, or whatever it might be, which can be really helpful. I also think sometimes it's really hard for the non-resident parent who's more often than not the dad and I'm not letting them off the hook, but sometimes it's hard for them to parent the kids in the way they want when they don't have as much time with them. And it's something I see with a lot of men who I work with one-on-one, or even couples, is that the dads will say, I wish my kids were more like this, but I only have the weekend and I can go so far with it. But then if the other 80% of the time they're at mum's where there aren't the same expectations, or it can be quite hard. And I think there's not many men who admit it in public that they're maybe a little bit disappointed with how their kids turned out.
And you know what? My husband can see some of that now, because and I feel for him because it's like, well, I haven't been in the family home for that many years. And so how much influence has he had, especially on the sort of younger one, when he moved out of the family home when they were 6? And I think to expect them to cover that gap in every other weekend or on a weeknight and stuff. But I think if guys can actually acknowledge that, and it's brought us together by him being able to say, I'm disappointed that they're not more interested in experiences, because it then allows the two of us to say, these are the ones we're going to push on. And then it's made us feel more like a team. So I guess if you can get your partner or your husband or whatever to dig into that hard feelings part that I know men struggle with sometimes, and know what their fear is and know what they're proud of their kids or disappointed of their kids, because all parents have that. They refuse to believe that not all parent loves 100% of all of the things that their children do. Then it's a little bit of an area that you can probably join forces on and decide if it's one that you want to push on or not. Is it something that matters to both of you, and work on it or not?
And you're right, because you've got to be a man who's very comfortable with being vulnerable and admitting some of the things about your own kids that you don't love to somebody who doesn't have the same unconditional love as maybe you do. And you're right. I remember the other day, one of my kids was doing something and I was thinking, like, really winds me up, that part of their personality. But I think so many men feel that in things about their children that they're not particularly proud of or they don't particularly like, it also brings up a lot of guilt for them, because they think if they'd have been there, even if they weren't the ones who left the relationship, they think if they'd have been there, they would have been there and been able to do it. And there's a lot of men who are walking around with stack loads of really complicated feelings. And actually, if you can get to the place that you have with your husband, where they can actually talk about it, and like you say, you can connect on it, because you haven't got somebody who's sitting there going, oh, my kids are absolutely perfect, they're wonderful. You've got someone who's saying, yeah, I'm disappointed that they're not like this as well.
Yeah. And you know what? He was also, it worked both ways, because sometimes I could have been, if I was feeling a bit in a thing, I could be maybe too harsh. And I think then he'd remind me when there was something good, and a tiny thing. The kid put stuff in the dishwasher without being asked. So I did it that time. So there's a bit more of a partnership in that. We don't always get the timings right. Or if we're both wound up, we can both say that was a shitty Saturday, wasn't it? Or that Sunday was challenging. And like the art of a debrief, honestly, is, I think I thought, again, we'd stew on it if we did that. And there have been some Sundays where we've spoken for 6 hours and just gone round and crying and how do we make this work and all this sort of stuff and the complexity of it all. And then there's others where the debrief is 5 minutes. And it was still a hard weekend, but it was like, okay, we're so aligned. It's the same thing. We both noticed it. Cool. Do we do something? Do we not? And then move on. But being able to have that level of conversation has been the game changer. I think I can't imagine what it's like having a husband or a partner that would have blamed me for, or said you're being too mean, you're expecting too much from them and stuff. I would have found that really hard. I don't know how I would have responded to that. To be totally honest.
And again, it puts the blame right back on you when you're already carrying a lot of
already blaming yourself. Yeah.
And I think some men, they do believe that, and I think other men, it's just like, let's just pass that bag along so I don't have to unpack it myself.
Yeah. And again, especially when it's just a weekend or a weeknight, you don't want to hash it out all weekend. You just want it to be. And I think I've taken a learning on my side for that, which is sometimes they don't want to pick up on everything that's gone wrong. They don't want to pick up on every behavior. They don't want to parent 24/7 for a weekend, because 9 times out of 10, it's that's wrong. That's wrong. Why didn't you do it like this way? Why will you not answer me? Look up from your phone. All the naggy parent things. They don't want to do it for a weekend. And I think at one point I was like, that's your job. You're a parent. That's what you should do. But now I'm like, do you know what? If you don't have the energy, that's fine. I was like, it can't always be the thing, but let's just ignore it for the afternoon. Let's just let it rise above it. Let's pick our battles. Let's choose it for a more peaceful life. And now it doesn't feel like I'm like that. Before would have felt like I wasn't doing anything to change behavior or to change the situation that we're in. Now it's this comfortable with being uncomfortable, like, which I've found a place where, and again, not all the time. This is good weeks, bad weeks, but it's okay that we didn't handle that today. And I'm not going to dwell over it. I'm not going to blame myself for it. I'm not going to blame him for it. It's a day in a teenager's life and it's a day, and we move on.
And some of it is about acceptance, because as you say, you wanted children in your life. You had a view of what it would be like, and you got there and suddenly it was so different. And actually there's a bit of relief in almost stopping trying to change it and accepting it. Obviously, you're not tolerating abusive behaviour, rude behaviour from your stepkids. That's obviously very different. But when you can get to okay, this isn't what I was hoping for, but it's costing me so much more to try and change it than it would be to accept it.
And I think ultimately it's more about me than it is about them. I could have sat here today and listed off all my issues with them and why they don't do this and like why we're so different. But fundamentally, people are who they are. And yes, some of the basics you tell them off for, that's fine. But they can't change me. I can't change them. And so nor should we want to. And I think this is also the thing. I don't want them to change who they are. I just want to be more comfortable with how they are. That's just because I'm used to louder kids, very outer people in my life and things, to then have the more introverted family now that I have. It was a change. And I think I was too harsh to think that my way is the best way. My way is how people should experience life and how they should run their days and things. And so there's definitely again, being comfortable with being uncomfortable in their choices and actually starting to say, good for you. And I think that's where there's been a shift. It's starting to appreciate their view of it and their take on things as a different way, which I hadn't. And I think that's where we'll go. I think that's, I hope, what the next sort of period is, where I learn more about why they think certain things are great, so that I will then start to appreciate that, which I hadn't been in my life before. And so that's my hope, rather than a beautifully blended family of everyone doing everything together and stuff, learning about what drives them and what they do, even if it's different to my preconceptions.
And enjoying what you want to do without guilt.
Yeah, exactly. And I think and I don't have guilt anymore. I used to have guilt if I took myself away to do something that I would want to do. But actually, I didn't get as much joy from it because, again, I was just removing myself from a situation. Removing yourself is not the answer to it. I don't think. It's finding the best way to deal with it so that then you get to enjoy your stuff and you get to enjoy stuff, or not, with them, either way. But you can just be you and not go crazy from overthinking.
That's always a very good start. Lucy, it's been so nice to talk to you today, and I'm really grateful to you for giving up your time and being so honest. I get a lot of DMs that touch on many of the things we've spoken about today, so I know that this conversation will be a real tonic for a lot of people, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been great.
Lucy said something near the end there that I keep coming back to. She said, I don't want them to change who they are. I just want to be more comfortable with how they are. And that's not about her being negative or giving up. It's one of the hardest and most honest shifts you can make in this role. From trying to change what you can't to finding a way to be yourself inside what actually exists. Lucy came into this with 5 rounds of IVF behind her, a picture in her head of what family life would look like, and a genuine willingness to love someone else's children. And it was still really hard. Not because she was doing it wrong, but because nobody told her what she was actually walking into. Nobody tells any of us. That's why this podcast exists. And if today's episode helped, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If this episode resonated, I've made a free guide called The Influence Gap. It's for stepmums who can't stop thinking about things they can't change. You can get it free at stepmumspace.com/influence gap. The link is in the show notes. I'll be back with another new episode next week. Till then, take care. Just quickly, if you're listening to this and thinking, this is exactly what happens with us, where something from the other house ends up sitting between you and your partner, and you keep having the same conversations, but nothing really shifts. This is one of the most common patterns I see in step families. And it's not just about communication, it's about what's happening structurally in the relationship. This is exactly the kind of thing I work through with couples. So if you want support with that, not just talking about it, but actually changing the pattern, you can find everything you need on my website, or you can drop me an email, katie@stepmumspace.com, to find out more about couples coaching.